So in this image, you can see this is kimberlite. That's the host rock. And then the term that we use for volcanic rocks when they contain crystals are phenocrysts. We call just any crystals contained in igneous rocks phenocrysts. And in this case, you can see this is a diamond-bearing kimberlite, where the igneous rock would be known as kimberlite. The phenocryst itself would be known as a diamond. Cool, right? Seems easy enough. So again, one of the things that we have seen throughout Earth's history is that these kimberlite pipes themselves are oftentimes not well preserved. Maybe there's been some erosion that's gone on. So these are not things that exist over a very large area. So this might be, 500 feet. I know I'm mixing my metric and standard, but it's good for your brain. It helps you think between the two. So they can generally be fairly small, at least in footprint, and oftentimes, again, not well exposed. One of the kind of in the history of diamond mining, obviously this goes back to antiquity. We're not going to pick it all apart, but probably the most significant event was there were children outside of Kimberley, South Africa, again, kimberlites. And what the children had done is they had found all these cool little kind of crystalline gems, were really beautiful, in streams, right? Because diamonds are very hard. They're the hardest substance in nature. And the kids basically, showed the adults, and the adults were realizing, oh my gosh, these are diamonds. And so people had started mining what we would call placer diamonds, digging them out of streams, thinking they were the types of things that deposited in streams. And essentially what they were doing is they were digging through the material that had actually been eroded and washed out into the stream, where the volcanic rock will actually break down fairly quickly, but the diamonds would be left behind, right? It was similar to placer mining that we saw with gold. But pretty quickly, people would follow these kind of stream drainages and realize that they had sources, and those sources were actually these kimberlite pipes. So before we get into the kind of the technical aspect of thinking about how we're going to go down into this kimberlite and get ourselves some diamond, one of the things that we can really point out pretty quickly is for a rock or for a geographic area to potentially have diamonds, it has to be rock that formed very early in the Earth's history. So in early Earth's history, in the eon, I know we haven't gotten a lot of time to dig through geologic time, but the first eon in Earth's history is what we call the Archean. So those are the oldest rocks. Those are from 4.6 to 2.5 billion years ago. That chunk of time we call the Archean. On this diagram, Archean rocks are shown highlighted in red. The next phase after that, still pretty old, is the 2.5 billion to 550 million year old rocks. That's a chunk of Earth's history that we know as the Proterozoic. Those rocks are shown here in green. So notice that when we look at places where there's really, really old crust that you can go put your boots on, that you can go walk around on, there's really a couple of places. So obviously you can see there's a lot of old rocks in Africa. We're talking about that. There's definitely a lot of old rocks exposed in Canada, what we call the Canadian Shield of the Craton. Parts of Europe, Russia for sure, and definitely a little bit in Australia that also becomes pretty important. Now if we compare this map, I'm going to bump over and look at a map of diamond-producing kimberlites, or kimberlite locations. Overall, this is showing kimberlite locations. Notice that they're basically in the same places, and you can see the little colored dots on this map. Those are indicating places where we have diamond-bearing kimberlites. You can see definitely kind of scattered around, but focused in those places where we tend to see old crust. So focused in Africa, focused in Russia, focused in Canada, Brazil. I guess I left Brazil off the discussion earlier. So those are places that coincidentally are known for producing diamonds. And actually, this loops all the way back to our discussion, I think one of the first videos of the semester, we started to talk about this kind of geological roll of the dice, right? Does your country happen to contain Archean-aged rocks, and do those Archean-aged rocks have diamond-bearing kimberlite? Because if they do, someone's going to get rich. All of that becomes pretty obvious when we start looking. Here's a great pie diagram of diamond producing countries. Obviously you can see Russia leading the way. This isn't just kind of diamond occurrence, this is actually active diamond mining, so some places kind of hold on to them. But obviously on this list, Africa has a pretty heavy showing, right? Obviously Russia at the top of the list, and then you see quite a few other African nations. And then if we bump over and look at this next map, this shows global diamond production in terms of country. And notice that obviously you see Russia up there, Canada, again Africa and Australia. South America doesn't quite make the list, although they do have plenty of reserves. So what is it that they say? Mo money, mo problems? This introduces the notion of blood diamond, or blood diamonds, or what we call conflict diamonds. And you can see in this map, this is showing places where we have problems with conflict associated with diamonds, and also diamond smuggling, that's shown in orange. But diamond conflict really kind of fundamentally works its way into this idea that many of the places in Africa where there are large diamond reserves, or high concentrations of kimberlites, places where people are mining, many times those have fairly, I guess I would use the word corrupt, or just weak governments. And oftentimes there'll be kind of gangs that ultimately move in, or kind of warlords that move in and will take control of a diamond mine. They'll obviously keep the production going, so they have to do the science and the engineering of actually extracting the diamonds, but then they use the profits from those diamonds to actually fund kind of warmongering or warfare with neighboring groups. And so there can be this conflict that's funded entirely by diamonds. And that's a problem, right? So especially in places that don't necessarily kind of have the kind of capability to combat that, right? So we can see lots of diamonds run by these kind of warlords. Obviously you can get certified conflict-free diamonds. There's a pretty big market for that, and I think there was a movie that came out some amount of time ago called Blood Diamond, which I'll have to admit I haven't seen. I'll probably go and watch it tonight, so tomorrow I'll know a lot more about conflict diamonds. Crysts. So I gave the story in Kimberley, South Africa, these children that go and discover these kind of shiny little rocks in the creek. Ultimately people are kind of following from the creek, doing placer diamond mining, which we still do. But one of the things that a stream will do is actually tell you where its source is. So you can kind of follow the diamonds upstream. And then people in South Africa kind of had this bonanza at the time. So all of a sudden they realized that the diamonds had occurred in this thing called a kimberlite. In reality, the kimberlite's a little more complex than this, and so there was small kind of holes where people would start to dig down and excavate and pull this material out. Eventually the holes kind of got larger and they all kind of combined into the same hole. But the problem remains, and you can see here, this is a 1885 cross-section of the diamond mine in Kimberley, South Africa. And it's this kind of crater at the top. And the crater was the part of the mine that had been excavated really for the kind of years prior, right? It's a place where, frankly, they could take slaves or very cheap labor, make them go down. Just really complicated system of, ropes and pulleys and potential pit collapse. And it was actually really, really nasty business. And so, especially when you see these mines that were discovered, 150, 200 years ago, there's this kind of open area near the surface where things were excavated that you could just do with kind of raw human labor. The mine is still there today. It's got obviously some problems. It's no longer active, but you can see that now it's really just a hole in the ground, which reflects the footprint of that kimberlite, right? And actually, we'll look at some modern diamond mines a little bit later. That's generally what they look like. They're not these huge sprawling mines that go to the horizon. They're actually fairly compact. They're just very deep. Actually, here, this is a cartoon or cartoon diagram showing a typical diamond mine, and you can see obviously the crater near the surface where this thing was likely excavated with human labor when it was first discovered, again, 150 years ago or so. But then the rock material below that, the kind of shaft that goes down, or the pipe, the kimberlite pipe, to get to that in the modern world, we have to drill and excavate a mine shaft next to that, and so we go down kind of in parallel, and then you put in a horizontal aspect of a mine. It's called a mine adit, or just a tunnel, and then they tunnel over to the kimberlite bearing, or the diamond bearing kimberlite rocks in the conduit itself. Obviously there's water issues here. You've got to be pumping water out of this thing nearly continuously to allow the miners to work. The deeper you go, the more expensive it gets. So depending on how much kind of raw material or how many diamonds you're pulling out of your mine, it's going to kind of determine how far down you can go, right? Eventually you'll cross this threshold where it's just too expensive to go down and extract those diamonds and bring them back to the surface. So I showed you the cartoon of the typical diamond mine. We talked about how you can go down in costs. So you can see here, these are modern diamond mines. This one's in Canada. And really they're vertical shafts, right? So there's kind of surface material where they've kind of made this pit, and they've even kind of gone after it with modern technology, the pit in the near surface. And then there's a shaft that goes down parallel to those, and you can go over. So again, a diamond mine can feel destructive. Mining generally has this destructive feel to it, but it doesn't, again, have a huge footprint. This is actually one of my favorite places. This is in Siberia, Russia, and you can see that there's kind of this industrial complex on the edge of town at this very large diamond mine, which again is mostly, remember, producing industrial diamonds and about 20% for the diamond market. So again, I also want to kind of tie back your knowledge to this fact that 80% of those diamonds recovered just the way that we were talking about, are used for industrial purposes. But of the gems that are, or of the diamonds that are recovered that are of gem quality, they kind of get to live on and have a life of their own. Actually, you kind of may or may not know, most of the diamonds, when they're recovered, kind of have a very similar path. And those diamonds, historically, are actually taken to Belgium, to the town of Antwerp, which it's like my favorite town in Belgium. I've been to Antwerp a couple of times. It's so cool. Diamonds aside. And what happens here is this is a place where people really started discovering the capabilities of faceting diamonds. So kind of highlighting their reflectivity, shaping them, trading them. So the primary diamond exchange really historically was based out of what we call the Diamond District in Antwerp, Belgium,